What's up, guys, and welcome to the Rebalance podcast, where we dive into topics that matter most when it comes to overcoming struggles, injuries, and finding balance in your life. Everybody's idea of balance is that bit different, so my goal is to give you different perspectives, practical tips, as well as expert insights into what it means to live a balanced life. My name is Robbie Cassidy. I'm a physiotherapist and a health coach, and I've been helping people reignite their love for challenge, overcome their fear, and find more balance in their life through the process of self-development. So, let's get into it. What's up, guys, and welcome back to the podcast. On this episode of the podcast, we're going to look at ligament injuries, and we're going to, talk about different approaches and different perspectives on ligament injuries, what you can do to help them if you have one yourself, as well as, the types that you get, should you ice them, the principles. I'm also going to cover different things like loading strategies, returning to activity, and then I'm going to touch on nutritional strategies at the end, because I want to try to give you a different perspective on it, and I want to try to give you a perspective that if you do have one, or if you get one in the future, that you are able to take care of it yourself in a way. Obviously, with this, it's not that you go off this podcast completely. You take this in conjunction with what your physio says and what they plan for you to do as well, because that's obviously the most important thing, is that you're on the right path when you're looking at these. So, to jump straight into it, when we look at ligament injuries, we have to differentiate between what grade it is and what type of an injury it is, because there's a big difference in a grade 1 and a grade 3. Now, within those, they actually get broken down a small bit more, so I'm just going to cover the basics of it and give you a better idea of what it could be. Now, a grade 1 injury is a small stretching tear. It's the majority of issues that you come across. It's like when somebody rolls their ankle and then someone shouts at them, like, walk it off, or try to walk it off, and then a lot of the time you'll be able to walk, you'll be able to get going again, but the next day it'll start to swell up. Now, obviously, there's some grade 1 injuries that when they happen, you won't be able to walk it off and it gets pretty sore, but that's in the upper end. It usually takes around about 2 to 6 weeks to recover from a grade 1, depends on a lot of factors and how aggressive you are with it. After that, then you're looking at a grade 2 injury. Now, grade 2 injury is a larger tear in the ligament, but it's not a complete tear, so it's an incomplete tear. What I mean by complete tear is the whole thing is gone. A grade 2 injury is very common in high velocity sports. So when you're actually when there's high impact, when there's a lot of chaos, and when there's things like when you roll an ankle, if for the same example, and you have to come off straight away, a lot of the time that's more of a grade 2. Now, that obviously basics, I'm just talking for simplicity. With the grade 2, you're looking at like a 4 to 16 week recovery with that, because obviously there's a bit more of it that's damaged, so it's going to take a bit more time to recover. Now, the last one then, the grade 3, is when it's a complete tear. So you'll often see this with like an ACL or an MCL. You'll get it with the ankle as well sometimes. Often you'll see it in jiu-jitsu. If somebody has a complete tear of, let's say, their foot or one of the ATFL ligaments in their ankle, there's certain moves that won't work as well on them, which if anyone that follows jiu-jitsu, you'll see there's certain guys that are able to just get away with foot locks because the ligament has gone. It's not there anymore. That's what they reported as anyway. The most common grade 3 tear that you'll come across is probably the ACL, where it's a complete rupture of the ACL, or an AC joint in your shoulder as well. You often get a grade 3 there from a high impact. And with these, it's difficult to determine a return to sport. Oftentimes people will opt for surgery if they're a sports person, because you're looking at a faster recovery. But grade 3 tear, as I said, it's very difficult to determine. You're looking at probably minimum 3 months to up to 3 years. Like if you get back in 3 months, you're flying it. But yeah, 10 weeks, 12 weeks to 3 years. But as I said, it's difficult to determine, because a lot of the time you're looking at function as opposed to like it being completely remodeled, because the remodeling phase takes a long time. Now, when you get the injury initially at the start, what are you supposed to do? Well, the old thinking was that you do this RICE protocol, where you rest, ice, compress, and elevate. They're finding actually that is an ineffective way of dealing with it, and a lot of times you can slow down the healing rate. I actually tell people to not ice it, and it's funny, when I was in Bali, one of my mates, he sprained his ankle. He got basically a footlock in a tournament, a straight footlock, and tore his ATFL, probably a grade 2, wouldn't say it was a grade 3, and everyone was saying it to him, like, you need to ice it, you need to rest it, you need to not move on it for the next, a week, and just put it up and relax. And I was like, don't do any of that. Don't ice it. Move around as much as you can, like within pain limits, obviously. Try get it, put a bit more weight on it as you go through it, and try get back into the swing of things as soon as you can. And I remember someone actually arguing with me outside, and I was like, I do this all the time, so stop. Like, you have read this online and someone has told you that it's an old way of thinking. The RICE protocol is an old way of thinking, and it's an ineffective way of dealing with them. Okay, so I wouldn't recommend it at all. You don't really want to ice it, because what it'll do is it'll cause an initial reduction in pain. It's supposed to slow the healing response. So actually what happens is the vasoconstriction, where everything closes up, you don't get the markers to the areas that they need to be at the time. Now, like, will it make the biggest difference? Not a massive difference, but we're looking at returning to sport as quick as possible here. So that's why I say I wouldn't ice it as much. Put it in cool water if you want to. If it makes you feel better, yeah, just not ice it completely straight away. Now, with this one, another really interesting thing is the guy who actually invented the RICE protocol, the rest, ice, compress, elevate. This is one of the funniest things that people still argue this. The literal guy that invented it has come out and said that it's not an effective protocol anymore, and to do different ones. So there's like this police, it's like where you're looking at protect, optimal loading. I know they still have ice in that one, but it's probably a better one. But when the guy who invents it comes out and says it's ineffective and not working anymore, maybe you should try listen to him, because it probably takes a lot to go against that bias of the fact that you invented it and it's easy just to keep pushing it. We see it all the time, that people, because they've come up with something, they just keep pushing it, even in the face of when it's like the research showing that it is not effective. That's my spiel on that done. Now, looking at the principles of it, when we're looking at it, it's very hard to beat natural history. And natural history of recovery is, as I said, where you're looking at those time frames of what I discussed above. If you do beat them, it's an anomaly in a lot of cases. But natural history also goes against, when you're looking at it, it's like general population, people that aren't doing that much. I think you should be aiming to try beat that in a lot of cases. You should be aiming to try get back quicker. You should be aiming to try help it a lot more, because if you do the work around it, like natural history is just a natural of what the average is, let's say. But the average don't do the work, if I'm honest. If you do the work, you should be looking at improving your recovery time. When you look at the healing phases, let's say from the time of injury, the first phase is that inflammation phase. It's usually about 48 hours, 24 to 48 hours. You have your proliferation then, 3 to 7 days, and then you have your remodeling, which is like up to 12 months after. What I would say for this is knowing the healing phases is good and it's important, but don't confuse healing phases with function and ability. Because you know the remodeling phase of a tendon or a ligament is up to 12 months after, does that mean that you shouldn't go back to sport for 12 months? No, obviously not. If you have an ankle sprain, you should be trying to get back in as quick as possible, or as quick as or as fast as your body allows you to. But if you're following that remodeling thing and you're taking 12 months and waiting to go back, it's not going to be effective. So it's good to know them, and it's good to kind of understand what happens in each phase. But in a general sense, I would say you need to focus on function and ability and what you can do more so than those specific phases, because as I said, they're general time frames and they're looking at full ligaments healing, which takes time. So how can you approach it? Now I'm going to talk about them in different ways, but when you're looking at the principles, early mobilization is key. Getting it moving, light range of motion, weight bearing as early as possible, and avoid being very, very, very overprotective with it. So I would always say you want to try test it. You want to try get it moving in small bits. So if it is your ankle, because that's the easiest one. If it's your ankle, that means you're trying to do your ankle circles, you're trying to point your toes, you're trying to bring it back up to you. There'll be a bit of pain and a bit of stiffness, but if you're doing light range of motion, very unlikely that you're going to do more damage in that case, because you're able to control it yourself. So you kind of want to lean into it and push into it a small bit at each way. As I'm doing this, I'm doing it myself. You want to lean into it and push into it and push into the end ranges a bit more to find out where it is. When you hit the spot that's actually injured, it will get sore. You'll feel it that bit more. That's why I'm saying early as possible, try get into it. Also, weight bearing is so important. Your body is going to prioritize movement and it's going to prioritize weight bearing as a survival mechanism. So I think that you want to be bearing weight on it as early as your body allows it to. So often I will say, when you sprain your ankle, take this with a pinch of salt. When you sprain your ankle, try to get it moving that evening. So like try getting up and trying doing light movements on it. If it's a grade 1, grade 2, let's say, where you're just putting very light weight on it and you're just testing it out, because you'll find then you'll be able to tolerate weight earlier on in the future. And that's the thing, is you're looking to pay it a day forward all the time. So weight bear as early as possible and avoid being too overprotective. And I'm going to talk about risk versus reward later on, so don't worry about that. You want to be just testing it. As I said, one of the other focuses or principles is you want to focus on function. Okay, so you want to focus on getting range of motion. It takes time, definitely. You want to get to a point where you have pain for your range of motion, and pushing into the stiffness is important, but it shouldn't be solely the focus on you getting back, because there's a lot of, when you look at the other factors, there's a lot of other things that contribute to it. So if instead of like focusing on having full range of motion before you start walking, if you start walking, it will come with that. And once you're consistent with keeping on top of it and pushing into it a bit more, you'll find that it will heal up a lot quicker. Okay, so that's another one. Focus on function as opposed to anything else. Strengthening it is obviously going to be really important. You need to look at the different ways you can strengthen it: isometrics, eccentrics, and concentrics. Isometrics where you're holding it, eccentrics where the muscle is lengthening, and concentrics where the muscle is shortening. Just make sure that you're playing around with each of those, timing it, getting it nice and slow, and then speeding it up. Strengthening it is going to be so important. Just focusing on like waiting for it to heal is going to slow it down. It's going to slow your recovery rate, and it's going to slow your return to sport, and you're going to have more issues with it in future because of that. What I would say is doing bits every day at home is going to help massively. It's going to really improve the speed at which it heals. When you look at it, should you do body weight or should you do gym exercises? I think you need to mix them both. It's probably easier to do a lot more body weight exercises at home if you're looking at ankle, knee, shoulder, and then when you are in the gym, then you can push it that bit more. But if you're taking over and you're doing little bits and pieces on it every day, you're going to see a huge improvement very fast in it, because you are testing it, and that's the key. What's up guys, Robbie here. I hope you're enjoying the show so far. I just wanted to take a quick moment to ask for your help. Could you please take a minute to leave us a rating on whatever you're listening to this right now? The ratings and reviews mean the world to us, and they help us to understand what you love about the show as well as what we can improve on. Plus, it does actually help us reach even more listeners again. Thank you so much for your support so far, and we are getting straight back into it right now. After looking at the range of motion and strength side of things, I want you to focus a small bit more on the movement and ability. What does that mean? Well, if it's a lower limb ligament injury, you want to start focusing on walking, because walking is going to be the easiest way that you can get a manageable load into it and still see a fairly significant improvement over time. And it's the goal of what you're trying to get back to in a lot of cases. So walking is key. If you ask anyone who's gotten an ACL surgery, basically what they'll say is once you come back, once you wake up, they'll try to get you up and moving on it as soon as possible to test it out again. But that's what they're supposed to do. Walking is key because it helps the body to kind of figure out weight distribution and how to fix the area, what way you can kind of build strength around it, proprioception, and everything involved in it. If you're able to, I would try to start walking, and I would try to do it unassisted as early as possible. That's like, if you have a really bad ligament injury, that doesn't mean you just get up and start going for a 5k walk, but it means that every day you're trying to get that bit further, and if you do that, you'll see a big improvement in it fairly quickly. If it's an upper limb, you're looking at weight bearing, you're looking at pushing and pulling, and weight bearing in the upper limb is like into like a push-up position, push-up off a wall, anything like that you're able to, like even crawling, like the bear crawl, stuff like that, where you're able to bring movement into it, but it's not testing it too much and you're not overstraining it. Controlled movements is a great way of looking at it. And then push and pull exercises like you do in the gym. You're anything to do with like pushing overhead once you're able, pushing out in front. That could be like a bench press, it could be a shoulder press. You could look at flies. Now flies are a bit more risky because of the position they put the shoulder in when it's injured, so a lot of people don't have as much control. So you do need to kind of figure out what works for you. But as I said, movement is going to be key here. So trying to get it back into it as soon as possible. If you're looking at, also I should throw in there, if you're looking at the shoulder, hanging from a bar is a nice simple one to get it working again. The other thing is that when you grip something, so if you're gripping a weight or gripping a bar, that activates all of the stabilizer muscles, so your rotator cuff in the shoulder. So just by gripping things, you're able to get a bit more of a contraction there and help to build a bit more strength around the area. So it's a simple one, but it makes a big difference. Now, outside, I suppose, the next level to movements and ability, you're looking at sports specific activity. And that means that you need to look at the activity that you do, whether that be running, or if it's playing football, playing hurling, playing soccer, or if it's jiu-jitsu or wrestling, whatever it is, whatever your sport is. You need to look at that. You need to look at the demands of the sport, and you need to try fit in bits and pieces here and there into your rehab early on. You need to figure out how you can set out little goals for yourself, whether that be jog around the pitch, whether that be run at 60%, 70%, 80%, or it could be that, let's just say in golf, that you're able to hit whatever, you're able to drive 5 balls or 10 balls. If it was jiu-jitsu, it might be that you are able to get in for a nice flow roll for a minute or 2 minutes, take a step back, see how you're feeling, and go back into it again. So it really makes a difference what it is. With running is a small bit easier because you can measure it. It could just be that you're getting out, you're walking 5k, and then you're building up to like a jog 1k, walk, jog, walk, and then picking up for like into a run, jog, and then obviously you're picking your speed up. So it really depends on the sport. It doesn't have to be that difficult. The goals don't have to be crazy, but just make sure that you are starting to incorporate sport-specific activity as early as possible, because it'll help the body. First off, it'll help with the transition back into the sport. And then second, it's going to build strength in ranges that are hard to hit in the gym and hard to hit at home, or things that you wouldn't consider as much at home. So that's why controlled environments are really, really good for that. It does come back when you are looking at rehab of any ligament injury. It comes back to the risk versus reward. You're always looking at that. It's always a consideration. And this is something I always talk about with clients, is that, okay, we can try get back a small bit faster, but by doing that, it's going to be a bit riskier. So we need to try and mitigate risk as much as possible to get the most reward out of it. If you always have that in the back of your mind that, okay, right, I know, like let's say for an LCL sprain in your knee, you could probably start doing jump landings before you start doing box jumps. So like starting on a box and landing down, and you could do that on a double leg. Now if you start doing that on a single leg, you will obviously build up strength a lot faster and control a lot faster, but there's a higher risk of injury with that. So you need to know what you're doing. There's a lot of other factors that come into that. When are you doing it? Are you fatigued when you're doing it? So obviously that increases the risk, and if you're not fatigued, then the risk lowers. So you're always looking at it in different ways. How can you mitigate risk and improve reward? And when you're rehabbing an injury, you're always playing with that. It's always a balance. You're trying to find that balance. So things that can help you get back faster are generally that bit more risky at times. Okay, but as I said, that's kind of the game. That's the art that you need to play with, and that's why it's always better to follow physio's advice in those situations. I'm always it depends, like when I'm working with sports people and they're trying to get back, depending on what their goals are, I'm generally pretty aggressive with certain rehab, because I think a lot of rehab protocols are very poorly done and they're very slow, and they don't take into account the fact that somebody is 25 or 30 years old as opposed to somebody who's 65 or 70 years old, and it's just the same program for both of them. So what someone may consider a bit more aggressive is not really that much more aggressive. It's just that taking age into account and taking ability into account, it may seem more aggressive. And if you did the same program with a 65 or 70 year old, then it probably would be too aggressive. That's the other thing. You need to look at age and you need to look at ability. They're huge, huge aspects of it. And then I guess one of the other principles is your recovery time, and understanding that you can have high days and you can have low days, that they don't all just have to be really high days that you're absolutely dogging and you're trying to get back as quick as you can, because you need to pull back. The same as your training, you need to pull back and recover. You need to give it time. You need to look at the inflammation and the pain. Like if you have a really high day, you have to expect the next day that it's going to be a small bit more sore, okay, or maybe a bit more inflammation there. Now that doesn't mean that it's made it worse by any means. It's the reaction of the body to a higher load. Start to plan your sessions then. Do you have a low day then? Do you hit 2 high days in a row because you know you have, let's say, 2 or 3 low days after that? Or let's say you're going for a hike, so you might do a high day and then a low day and then go for your hike, okay? Or a hike might be a medium day. It really depends. Understanding what you're doing around you and how that's going to affect it is huge. And if you know that, okay, right, I can have a high day today because I'm going to walk with, let's say, your girlfriend or your wife, or you're going to walk with your partner, husband, or whatever, friend. If you're going to walk with somebody the next day, you can then say, okay, I can have a high day here because the walking will help to mitigate some of that inflammation. It's going to help to alleviate the pain as well, obviously, because it's going to take some of the pain away, and you're going to move a lot better. So I would always try to combine them. Like walking is the staple for lower limb issues. And the same thing is if you know that you're going to be doing, let's say you're training on a Wednesday and you're in the gym on a Tuesday night, and you know, okay, well, at training tomorrow, I'm just going to, for example, in jiu-jitsu, I'm just going to roll for maybe 3 or 4 minutes, and I'm going to have a nice easy roll. Well, then you take that into account on the Tuesday night, and then you don't just dog it on the Tuesday night. You take into account, okay, I'm going to be in these certain positions, so maybe I don't overpress on this, or I don't go to fatigue, I just hit lower reps, where I'm hitting like 5 or 6 reps and working on the strength side of things, as opposed to hitting those higher reps where you're trying to build more tolerance. Okay, there's a lot that goes into it, but I'm just giving you different ideas because I want you to be able to formulate your own opinion on it. And I should, in my opinion, the only way to do that is to give you different options. I know for someone who's not, let's say, who's not a therapist, it might seem like a lot, but if I put it out now, you're going to get into the subconscious. Give it a couple of days and you'll have a better understanding. That's the way I think about it anyway. Now, looking at loading strategies. Now, I've talked about these a small bit before, but I want to go through them individually just so you can start to incorporate these into your own training. Early mobilization, as I talked about, trying to get up, moving around on it early, little range of motion movements, little strengthening exercises, very light movements. Then outside of that is perturbation training, where you're holding a position. Let's say you could be standing on one leg and someone's just lightly pushing you, or you could be holding a resistance band and doing like a pal-off press, where you're pushing out in front of you, and that there's a bit of a shake in it. The perturbation, all it means, fancy word, is like a shake or an off balance, and adding that to it just helps with the neuromuscular activity, and it helps with the coordination. It also helps to kind of build strength in those little ranges that you may not hit as much. Okay, other things could be like standing on a pillow if it's a lower limb injury, but that kind of combines with coordination, which is the next one, coordination training. So doing 2 things at once. Really simple one here. If you have a knee injury and you're basically hand passing a ball off a wall and catching it at the same time. So it's just nice to try that out. Or if you're, let's say if you're bending down, picking things up, or if you are doing like a bear crawl for a shoulder injury, you're doing a bear crawl and then you're reaching up and you're trying to catch something. Or you're in a high plank position, you're picking a ball up from one side and you're moving it to the other, you're changing and you're moving it over and back. Simple ideas just to test out the shoulder that bit more. All of those things will work, but you need to just look at the level that you're at. Do you go for like a low level coordination thing where it's very simple, or do you do higher level where you're later on in your rehab and you feel that you can test it a small bit more? As I said, it comes back to risk and reward, always. Rhythmic training is like you're keeping on time with the beat. So it could be that you're doing a high walk step up, and what you're doing is you're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the way up. You're holding at the top for 1, 2, 3, and then you're dropping 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The rhythmic side of things it obviously takes it back, makes it a lot slower, makes you more consistent through the movement, and is a great way of building strength. And it's a great way of building coordination because your body and your brain loves rhythm. It loves it. So anything that you can do to add rhythm into your training. So a lot of people train with music. If you add rhythm into your training, it just helps you to get into a bit more of a flow state. When you're in a flow state, your alertness is at peak. It's in peak performance state. Okay. Rhythmic training is really nice. And then the last one, but they all kind of play into it anyway, is plyometric training. And there's obviously more, but these are the ones I'm going to talk about now. Plyometric training is very, very good for building up your proprioceptive neuromuscular control. Proprioception, for anyone who doesn't know what it is, it's your body's awareness in space. It's kind of like, what's an easy way of describing it? When you're walking, you don't need to look down at your feet every time before you take a step. Okay, that's a simple one. Or if you close your eyes and you lift your arm up and down and up again, you have a fair idea of where your hand is. But a lot of the time, especially after people have a stroke, Parkinson's issues, their proprioception is affected, and they don't really know where their body is as much in space. But it is important because you have little proprioceptors around. Let's just say you sprain your ankle, you have little proprioceptors around your ankle, and they need to be built up again or need to be improved because they get damaged with the injury. And then with a non-use after the injury, that's when their alertness drops down a small bit. So when the alertness drops, it becomes a bit of an issue, and you don't want to be just jogging along and your foot just falling into the inside and you not knowing. So that's why the proprioception side of things is really important. How do you work on it? As I said, plyometrics, You can do jumps, you can do hops, you can do skipping, whatever helps you to get into that mode, and whatever helps you to that you can do it at a low level and a high level. Low level plyometric training would literally just be jumping over a line or doing like a lateral skater hop where you're jumping left to right. Higher level would be like a box jump, counter movement jump, something like where you're dropping off and then you're jumping and you're landing. You can make these crazy if you want to, as you often see, where you can jump down, catch something, pass it, jump on. Like you can really mess around with that the plyometric side of things a bit more as well. Now the last two things, because I don't want to hold you too much longer, I want you to just get all the information that you need so you can start applying it straight away, or apply it to the next time you have an issue, is this returning to activity. In my opinion, I think and I've touched on this already, but I think you need to return as early as possible to whatever sport or activity you want to get back to, once the body allows. If you have like an ACL repair, you're not going to just go back and start running straight away. You'd be surprised what people do, but you need to be a bit careful with it. As I said, it comes back to risk and reward. And what you're looking at is you need to look at, when you look at your sport, look at the chaotic versus controlled aspects of the sport. Really quick example, in terms of football, a controlled thing is where you're just running straight across and you're hand passing, or you're just kicking scores. A chaotic environment is when you're in let's say a small sided drill where you're hand passing around and there's people that are tackling you. There's a lot more unpredictable events, a lot more unpredictable people and movements. And in jiu-jitsu, I know I keep coming back to jiu-jitsu, but I know it's just an easy example. That could be like, right, do you want to roll, you have an injury, do you want to roll with a new white belt who's just started, or do you want to roll with a black belt who knows you have the injury, it's a bit older and they're going to take it that bit easier? That's more of a controlled environment. The chaotic environment is go with the white belt who's just absolutely going crazy. That's your chaotic side. In running, the chaotic side would probably be, the more controlled one would be running on a track. Chaotic would be if you were running through like mountains, or if you were running trail running. That's the word I was trying to think of. That's more chaotic because it's less predictable in what you're doing. And obviously running in like the rain and stuff like that is going to be a bit more unpredictable. So you need to look at what you can do and how you can break it down into like more control at the start, and then slowly but surely introducing it. Now, as an aside, just for people, this is a nice little way of testing it out. And I often try to apply this model across the board and everything, just in life. If you're doing it, okay, you should be able to go into a controlled, and then as you get better, then just ease into the chaotic one for like a minute or two. Go back to your controlled, and then you might just finish out your session in controlled. But just getting into that for just a second or two where it's not completely chaotic, but it's slightly, you'll find that you'll improve a lot faster. And I think it's a really good way of learning a new skill, and especially rehabbing, is work within your limits, dip into the deep end, and then come back in again. Work within your limits that are just a bit further, dip into the deep end and come back in again. And it's a great way of picking up skills, because what you do is you kind of see what the next couple of levels are like, and then you try apply your learning from there back to the start again. If you just go straight to the deep end of things, your learning will be stunted at a certain stage, because you're going to be so out of your depth that you're not going to be picking up anything. And it is important to have that area of competence that you're still able to work within. I think the exact same thing applies to your rehab, where you're building it up over time, but you're still testing it and you're coming back. Push it and come back again. Last one then, with your nutritional strategies, really simple. What I would say is that making sure that obviously your protein and your carbs and everything is good. I don't ever generally talk about nutrition because it's not my area of expertise, but looking at some of the research, they're saying that omega-3 fatty acids reduce inflammation at times and improve tissue healing. And the other one then is that vitamin D. The idea of having more vitamin D in your body, it's been linked to improved muscle and bone health, and then this can indirectly possibly support ligamentous healing. So they're just two, when I was looking through the research, that I'd cropped up a few times. So I said I better mention them because people are always looking for that edge, but that's a nice one. They're things that you add on top of all of the other things. Outside of that, you're looking at keeping your diet good, making sure you're taking on enough water, sleeping and napping. If like napping is the best recovery agent outside of normal recovery agents, your sleep, diet and all that. I push it so much, and anyone who listens to this podcast a lot will know that. And just keeping all those in line. Really, that is everything I wanted to talk about today. I hope that you were able to take a bit away from that and you can now apply it to your own training. And the same thing works, okay? Just a little one that I'll finish on. Think about this. Rehab and performance is the same thing, okay? It's basically the same thing, just different demands. And that means that to prehab, to make sure that to reduce your likelihood of getting an injury, you can use the same principles and apply them to it. Okay, so that's what I'll leave you on. I want you to think about that. How can you use the same principles of what I've talked about? And how can you apply that to your training? So to either rehab the injury or to prehab your body so that you're not in as much trouble. And that means that you're looking at the early mobilization, you're looking at focusing on function and strength, you're looking at sport-specific activities, the risk versus reward in your training. It means that you're looking at perturbation training, coordination training, rhythmic and plyometric, as well as when you are in your training, when you're starting to get fatigued, well, do you go into a very chaotic environment or do you stay in more of a controlled environment? Hopefully that leaves you with a better understanding of what you can do, and I will leave you all on that. Thank you very much for listening again this week, and I will chat to you all again next Sunday. Have a good one. Okay guys, thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you're looking to learn more about what we do, as well as check out any of the mobility and rehab programs we have available, just head over to the description of this podcast and you will find a link to all the programs there. As always, thank you for listening, and I will chat to you all again in the next episode. Have a good one.